Where do you think where do you think gutting the Clean Water Act came from? It's a public policy. Where do you think gutting the Clean Air Act came from? It's a public policy. Where do you think overturning the ban on pesticides that harm a developing child's brain came from? It's a public policy. Where do you think a $2 trillion $2 trillion tax cut that gives 83 cents to out of every dollar to the richest Americans and corporations comes from? It's a public policy. What are corporate subsidies? They're public policies. What is giving aerial support to a genocidal war? It's a public policy. What's invading Iraq? It's a public policy. None of those things are things which the private sector or non-government NGOs could handle. I've been very involved in nonprofit activism, but no amount of private charity can compensate for a basic lack of social justice.
And is that the issue, right? It's like a basic lack of social justice.
Well, there's an assault. We're living through a systematic assault on our democracy. And even though this president pursues an agenda of active assault, the erosion of the erosion of our democracy has been going on for a while. We have been sliding towards a corporate aristocracy for 40 years. Louis Brandeis, the late Supreme Court Justice, said you can have large amounts of money concentrated in the hands of a very few, or you can have democracy. You cannot have both. As soon as the consolidation of corporate wealth became such an entrenched aspect of the functioning, so entrenched within the functioning of the U.S. government and the unwieldy power of all that money, the undue influence of all that money on our political system, our democracy has been diminished and will continue to be diminished if we don't stage an intervention.
One of the things that I heard in your speech that got me thinking was you mentioned that you were a big fan of Warren's 3% wealth tax, right? On the what's the threshold? Right. And then Andrew Yang's UBI. You were interested in universal
Andrew
basic
says
income.
UBI, but not the wealth tax. Listen, I want a massive infusion of economic hope and opportunity into the life of the average American. It's like you go to the hospital. We need massive antibiotics.
What was interesting, and adding to that, Tulsi, you were a big fan of. You liked Tulsi's emphasis on. Thinking about international power and thinking about the forever wars. I think is her phrase.
No, I do not necessarily agree with every policy position that she takes. Although I definitely defended her against the smear the other day, and I like her as a person. What I have pointed out, as you just said, is that we have both brought up the topic of the military-industrial complex. She talks about the warmongers. I talk about the military-industrial complex. It's really the same thing. And she and I are the only two bringing it up, which says everything to me.
You began your speech saying that I'm not running against several of these other candidates. I'm running with these other great candidates, and I think that you're sort of mentioning these sort of like popular among your base policies of these other candidates is sort of part of that sort of how you're thinking. It seems about this race. Why do you think that that's effective, right? Because I mean, I worry if I'm your campaign manager, if I'm you, I'm worried about distinction, right? I'm worried about how to be distinct.
I think there's some truth to that, and I think there is some truth to what you were saying, because I see people on the internet sometimes say, "Come on, Marianne, you're going to have to start hitting here." I do think I drew some serious distinctions today. Actually, I do. I think I did, but I think that those distinctions can be made from an honorable place. I have great affection for Joe Biden. I have great affection for Bernie Sanders. I have great affection for Elizabeth Warren. Corey's always been lovely to me. Kirsten Gillibrand was lovely. We've got to remember these are individuals here. We want to. It is essential that we claim a space of honorable debate, and I think that it's possible to draw distinction without being negative.
I think that's really hard work. I think that
it is hard work.
That's not something our political system's really built on.
But I think several of us are trying hard. Actually, there have been the times a couple of candidates are known for during their debate performances taking off after another candidate. I don't think it served them well. I don't think it served them well.
I'm thinking of Julian, the instance that sticks out for me is the Julian Castro at the debate.
And Kamala with...
Certainly.
So, I can't remember the last thing I was going to say about that.
No, it's okay. I mean, but thinking about how I don't know, like it doesn't serve, but on some hand, it's like, especially if you're not one of these like sort of if you're not the Biden or the Sanders or the Warren campaign, it's like how do you?
But I think today I did.
Okay.
I talked about.
What is that strategy?
It's not strategy. My strategy is truth-telling to the best of my ability. I talked today about a more holistic, integrative approach, which I believe is very necessary for a 21st century president. I think Barack Obama was the last president really dealing with the 20th century world, the leftovers of a 20th century world. I think the imperatives of the 21st century are far more integrative, and we need a more whole person. We need a person who is as adept at understanding cause as at understanding effects, and knows how change needs to be navigated from a deep place that has as much to do with moral persuasion and and understanding of psychological dynamics. I talked about how we need a political vision, or as I'm saying to you anyway, we don't need a political mechanic as much as we need a political visionary right now. FDR said that the main role of the presidency, he said, is moral leadership. He said the administrative aspects of the job are secondary. Now, this is a man who led the United States through World War II. This is a man who led us through the Depression. This is the man who gave us the New Deal. This is a man who understood about policies and plans. And yet he said that the main issue is moral leadership. Our problem is not that we need a political mechanic. We have a lot of good political mechanics. A lot of the people running are good political mechanics. You don't become there's no better political mechanic than a Bernie or an Elizabeth. But what we need now, the problem is not that we lack political mechanics. The problem is that we need a vision of what road we should be on. You could have the best car mechanic in the world. They don't necessarily know what road leads to San Antonio. This whole issue of experience, frankly, when people say you need political experience, very experienced politicians led us into Iraq. Very experienced politicians led us into Vietnam. It's a lack of wisdom that's the problem. It's a lack of moral certitude. It's a lack of genuine devotion to democratic as opposed to humanitarian as opposed to economic principle, and a real vision of how we make that transition from an economic to a humanitarian bottom line. It's more than just policy that holds capitalism accountable. It's a bigger transition in our thinking away from a virulent strain of capitalism to a capitalism with a conscience. It's a paradigm shift, and it involves a lot of pieces, and someone who can see the whole picture is important, and to really reject and to be able to articulate the rejection of an argument that we cannot answer all of our humanitarian challenges because it would be bad economics, when in fact it's the opposite. It's when we do answer all our humanitarian challenges that both the state of our humanity and our economics will be improved. That's a larger conversation than just a plan for this or a plan for that.
One of the final question I'll ask. One of the things that I was really interested in was you talked a little bit. I don't know that Iowans necessarily care about perception, right? That seems time and time again. It seems
which is kind of beautiful.
It's kind of beautiful
because you know you have the power.
One of the things that I was sort of interested in that you talked about like sort of the way your campaign was covered early on, which was like sort of as a side, like honestly as a sideshow, right? They kind of gave you kind of here's this weird person doing this, making this case for America, right? And what would that case be? But you're right. You make the point that like they've kind of moved me into a different tent, right? Now I'm sort of being treated as like we want to have you in the conversation, but we don't necessarily see you on the front front of the podium.
Well, it's
and I'm wondering like for you. What led to that? How did you see that change? Right, from how did you see that change of coverage, and what might that? How do you get to that next? I guess that next tier. How do you get to that next place?
None of that's really under my control.
Okay,
I'm the same person I was.
You don't think your experience on the campaign changed?
Well, yeah. I think there were a couple of sloppy comments I made that I learned better.
Yeah,
but they never meant what people have said they meant. Right. Yeah, I've
You're talking about like the vaccine comment, right? How that was
the hurricane
spun.
and stuff. So
right.
I've realized you have to be very careful. But once again, they didn't mean what people took them to mean and used them to mean. Aha, we got it. We're going to use that for ammunition. I think that what I've learned is that, well, first of all, that smear was successful at keeping me out of the debates. But I had to ask myself, does that mean I should drop out of the race? And absolutely not. The Democratic debates do not determine who's running for president. And I think the role of the DNC is to facilitate democracy, not dictate democracy. When they say, well, how are we going to narrow the field? That's your job. That's called primaries. That's what primaries are for. So this idea we should narrow the field, somebody said, well, it's like children. You can't give them too many choices. And my response to that is, but the voters are not children. And what I see in Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, and South Carolina is people are thinking. People are listening and thinking this is what's supposed to be happening. People are aware this is profoundly consequential, this decision, not only for the ability to defeat Donald Trump, but possibly where the world goes. So this is so big, and people need this time, and the DNC should keep its fingers off the scale. That's how I feel. And I think that, and I trust the American people. I'm not in control of that, nor should I be. Who you caucus for, it's really your business, and I have respect for that. My business is to know that I've placed in front of you one particular option, articulated as best I can, of how I see America and what I would do with the levers of the presidency. It is your choice whether you think that's a good idea. That's how it should be. It shouldn't be about manipulating, it shouldn't be about controlling, it shouldn't be about anything. My job is to articulate what I believe. And your job is, as a voter, is to say, according to the dictates of your own conscience, your own wisdom, and your own intelligence, which path you think is best. There's something so clean about that. There's something so right about that. There's something so democratic and profound about that. I mean, that's like huge. And all that other stuff is another political universe. The money, the pundits, the polls, the control. And I believe it's a corruption of the process. Whereas I think me talking to a voter, this is what I'll do if you elect me, and you thinking about it and deciding what you want, is really profound.
Great. Marianne Williamson, thank you so much for
Thank
taking the
you.
time with